Hello, this is Dr. Pasion-Gonzales, and this week's lecture video is on Chapter 9, Motivation and Emotion. Now for me, this is where psychology gets really interesting. I think the research that psychologists do in this area is just fascinating. And specifically, we're going to spend most of our time talking about Carol Dweck and her research on fixed versus growth mindset, because I think this is not only interesting, but really applicable to your life as a student. Now, from your reading this week, I want you to make sure that you pay attention to a couple of key figures and key ideas. For example, be able to tell me about McClellan's need for affiliation, power, and achievement. Also, be familiar with the arousal theory and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Also, in section 9.8, I think Ledoux's research is really interesting. So just be familiar with that because I think it's just good stuff. In section 9.9, be familiar with some of the theories of emotion. For example, James and Lang, Cannon and Bard, and the facial feedback hypothesis. Lastly, the angry happy experiment by Schachter and Singer is really interesting. You know what, in fact, let's talk a little bit more about that today, okay? Before we get to Carol Dweck. If you remember from the chapter, they injected subjects with adrenaline, which led to physical arousal, the symptoms that you would expect if you were really scared or nervous or excited. But there were two different conditions that set a different social context for that arousal. Now, it's interesting to me that our physiological response alone is not enough to dictate whether or not we should be angry or happy or scared. So basically, these powerful emotions are all very similar at a physiological level, and they require interpretation to label these physiological sensations appropriately. Think about the fact that people pay good money to ride a roller coaster. But if you had that same physiological sensation on an airplane flying to the East Coast, that giddy excitement would be absolute fear for your life. So the context really matters. Or think about the fact that people pay $12 to watch a scary movie or a movie that they know is going to make them cry. But if any of those situations were to happen in real life, that would be a really bad day. The emotion itself doesn't take on meaning until we give it a context. Now, for me, perhaps the best example of this is if you've ever watched a young child fall and skin their knee, and they look up for the nearest parent or adult and then cry once they make eye contact, right? Every parent knows that if you make a big deal out of it, they cry more. And if you minimize the fall or even find a way to get them to laugh, the child moves on very quickly. An event doesn't have meaning until we give it meaning. All right, let's talk about Carol Dweck. When I first read her study several years ago, I was absolutely captivated by the idea that a few words could have such a dramatic impact on objective performance. So let's review this research quickly. This is not in your book, by the way, but it's really interesting. So Carol Dweck and her team, they took a class of fifth graders and they divided them up into two groups. And they had them solve some math problems, some math puzzles. And so their scores were graded and they were given feedback on how they did. When they were given feedback on their scores, they included one of two messages. To the first group, they were given their score along with this statement: "You must be really smart at this." The second group got their feedback, but their statement included, "You must have worked really hard at this." So this was the only difference between these two groups. In every other way, they were exactly identical. So how this would work is the student would get a piece of paper that might say, Johnny, you got 7 out of 10 of the math questions correct. You must be really smart. That's group A. Group B might be, Mary, you got 8 correct out of 10. You must have worked really hard at this. In the next round of tests, they were given the choice to solve easy or difficult puzzles. Now, 2/3 of the quote unquote smart group chose the easy test, while 90% of the hardworking group chose the difficult test. Next, both groups were given unsolvable puzzles. The first smart group, they gave up sooner than the other group. And the group that was praised for their effort, they persevered on the test longer, they enjoyed it more, and suffered no loss in confidence compared to the first group. Then, third round, puzzles with the same difficulty were administered again. So essentially, they were retested. And here's where things get really interesting. The group that was praised for their effort, their performance improved by 30%. The group that was told that they were smart, their performance actually decreased. They did worse on the post-test than they did the pre-test by about 20%. So you've got this 50% swing in test scores in performance based on the difference of you were really smart, you worked really hard. That was it. And remember, there wasn't any real difference between these two groups. It was just the feedback that they were given. So Carol Dweck, when she summarizes the study, she says this: praising children's intelligence harms their motivation and it harms their performance. Now, if this isn't bad enough, the students were asked to journal and pass on the results of their test scores to future students who were going to replicate the study. What they found was the smart group actually lied about how well they did on the test, on the puzzles. They said they scored higher than they actually did. Now, this is just amazing to me. Again, the idea that a single shift in emphasis could have such a profound impact on actual measurable school performance is crazy. When I think about this, it's not just about schoolwork. This benefit can apply to sports or your work or even a hobby like practicing your art or music. I just love the idea that when we encourage the right attributes, people can make measurable improvements in their performance. I love this stuff. Her book, where she describes all this, is called Mindset: The New Psychology of Success. And it's well written and pretty interesting. So in all of your free time, I would encourage you to give it a read. It really is good stuff. So in the book, Carol Dweck talks about two mindsets, a fixed versus a growth mindset. And the fixed mindset in the study would be the students who were told that they were smart. So think about a fixed mindset as the idea that you either have it or you don't. You're either naturally good at art or you're not. You're smart in school or you're not. You can sing or you can't. And the idea with a fixed mindset, it doesn't matter how much you practice, doesn't matter how hard you work, you can only be as good as you naturally are. So it's fixed in that sense. Okay? So compare that or contrast that to a growth mindset, where any abilities or talents you have can be improved and mastered with time and effort. So in the nature over nurture debate, the growth mindset would say nurture trumps nature. That's the growth mindset. For a fixed mindset, people believe that your natural abilities are innate. It's nature over nurture. Okay, so the clearest example of this to me is in the comic book world, where you've got Superman. He is the iconic image of a fixed mindset. All of his abilities are natural. He didn't do anything to earn them, to get them. He just happened to be Kryptonian, and the radiation from the yellow sun gives them these amazing superpowers. So compare this to Batman, who has no superpowers to speak of. Everything that he accomplishes is through study, hard work, effort, basically grit. Now, the interesting thing about this fixed versus growth mindset is that people with a fixed mindset perform worse because they are often hampered by the fear that they're not going to be good enough or that other people will see that they're not good enough. So making mistakes, looking foolish, looking stupid is devastating for them. In contrast, people who can look at making mistakes as a challenge, not a reflection of their character, and in fact come to realize that one's willingness to make a lot of mistakes is how we get good and improve at anything, it's a whole different ballgame. I love this study and this idea of growth versus fixed mindset because it doesn't require years and years of therapy and training to benefit from a simple shift in thinking. The students who were told that they were smart versus hardworking, they weren't any different from each other. It was a random selection. The only difference was they were told that they were smart or hardworking. That idea was reinforced. That is so encouraging to me that we don't even need to be hard workers if we begin to view ourselves as hard workers. We can see benefits from that. As a student, I can't think of a more important message than this, that no matter how smart you are or how smart you think you're not, no matter how easy or difficult school comes to you, in the end, natural talent and ability and smarts is not going to get you nearly as far as your willingness to make mistakes in order to learn and improve what you're doing. You're likely to enjoy the process so much more. You're going to be less worried, less stressed, and still your performance is going to improve. Don't be afraid to make mistakes because you know that that's the path to improving. If I could have a bobblehead for psychologists I love, Carol Dweck would be one of them. So there you go. Remember, as you read your chapter, do the quizzes that are scattered throughout the chapter. Also in Revel, do the chapter quiz in Revel. Separate from that is the Canvas exam. Do that in Canvas, and of course do your discussion board. Okay? Remember, my office hours are Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock. In the announcements is the link to that Zoom. If you have any questions, let me know, and enjoy this stuff. This is really interesting, relevant material, so soak it all in. Don't just read it. Don't just do well on the tests. Learn this stuff because it's gonna make you a better student. It's gonna make you a better person. Okay? All right. Enjoy. Talk to you soon. Bye.